Oh no.
Have you ever had a crazy idea that just wouldn't let go? Meet Vlad. He's a crayon and he inspired me to get 1,000 of his friends and build an art desk for my wife with one really specific feature. Building with crayons comes with its own challenges though. They are made out of wax, which means they don't stick to anything. That's why we are finishing our furniture pieces usually with wax or hard wax oils. It repels other materials. Crayons are also super soft and melt easily, making them tricky to work with. Our plan is to melt the crayons into a giant colorful gradient pattern, then try to encase them in epoxy to stabilize them. Seems easy enough, right? Well, what happens next is a mix of melted wax, crushed dreams, and a surprising lesson about where ideas actually come from. Alright, let's dive into the crayon challenge. First up, we're building the epoxy form. I'm reusing a form from a previous build. I always tape the bottom pieces of my forms. This way you can use them again later for another project. The side pieces usually break, so I don't bother taping them. Tape is expensive too. While I was starting this build, I was wondering, how did I even get this idea? Where do ideas even come from? Yeah, I have ADHD, so I get sidetracked like that a lot. But when I did some research on the topic, it seems a question that's puzzling people for ages. Apparently, research shows that ideas don't just pop up out of nowhere. They build up over time. You see things again and again and suddenly you look at them differently. Or maybe something new comes along and changes how you think about stuff you've seen before. In my case, my inspiration came from my 4-year-old son. I wanted to make something special for my wife for our 5-year anniversary. And one day my son was drawing while I was working in my shop. He must have dropped a red crayon on the floor. Being lazy as I am, I just put it in a drawer instead of bringing it back to the house, and I kind of forgot about it. Then one day I was cleaning out that drawer and suddenly this idea popped into my head. It seemed to come out of nowhere. But here's the thing about using crayons to build a table. It's not as easy as it sounds. Crayons are made mostly out of paraffin wax. This stuff melts at a pretty low temperature, around 50 to 60 degrees Celsius or 120 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're into that. We have days here in Australia that get to that temperature. Another problem is that crayons don't stick to other things very well at all. When you're building stuff, you usually need materials to stick to other materials, stick together with sticky glue or sticky stuff. So why am I doing this? Well, it's all about thinking outside the box or outside the crayon box. Sometimes the craziest ideas lead to the most interesting results. Plus, I love a good challenge. And let me tell you, building a table out of crayons is definitely a challenge. And also, what's the worst thing that can happen?
Oh no.
After we put our first layer of pure black epoxy, it was time to tackle the first big challenge. Sorting all of those crayons by color. Guys, I had no idea how many different shades of colors there are. So first I started rough sorting them into piles of blue, red, yellow, orange and so on. But man, it took forever. And then the next really tedious challenge came. Every single one of those 1,000 crayons needed its wrapper removed by hand. The biggest problem I ran into was that my shop was pretty cool, so the glue on the paper stuck like crazy. I came up with a solution though. I set up a space heater to warm up the crayons a bit. After that, the paper came off way easier. But let me tell you, it was already turning into a huge mess. Some of the crayons started to melt from the heat and I got hot wax stuck under my fingernails. Not fun at all. But finally, after what felt like days, it was 6 hours, all the crayons were naked and ready for the next step. Okay, so that was brutal. It's 11 p.m. and this is the third night I'm peeling. I think that's the word, peeling crayons. So I'm done, finally. So full disclosure, I didn't do any of the gray ones or the white ones because I don't know where to fit them. My fingers are hurting. I had so much hot wax on my fingers because they melted through the space heater. I really hope that's gonna be worth it. But we're done. Now came the really tricky part, melting those crayons. I wanted to create this awesome gradient effect, so I started with the darkest colors and just piled them on top of each other. Big mistake. As soon as I started melting them, the wax went everywhere. It flowed into spots where other colors were supposed to go. So I changed my approach. I laid out all of the crayons first, then started melting them into place. You'd think watching crayons melt would be super satisfying, right? Well, it wasn't quite as smooth as I hoped. I ran into issues when the crayons were overlapping. The top layer seemed to protect the bottom one, so some parts weren't melting properly. I also had to be super careful not to overheat the crayons. When the crayons get too hot, they become very liquid and start mixing together. I found out that if you mix all of those colors together, you get a very nice poopy brown. As we pour the first layer of epoxy, let's dive into the wild world of imagination. You know how we all picture things in our heads? Well, it turns out not everyone can do that. Interesting, right? There's this thing called aphantasia. It's when people can't create mental images in their mind. Imagine trying to picture a red apple. For most of us, we can see it clear as day in our heads. But for some, there's just nothing. It's like their mind's eye is blind. But here's where it gets even crazier. There's actually a whole scale of people picturing things in their minds. It goes from aphantasia, nothing at all the way to hyperphantasia. People with hyperphantasia can create super vivid, detailed mental images. It's like they have a 4K TV in their brains. Now, you might think that would be a huge hindrance to creative people, that people who can't imagine things aren't creative at all. But get this, it doesn't always work that way. Take Chris from 4 Eyes Furniture. He has aphantasia, but he's still designing one of the most craziest and creative pieces of furniture. It just goes to show that creativity comes in all different forms. So I just came in here and wanted to check from yesterday the progress. And we have huge cracks in here. Like, oh my God. To be fair, it's quite solid now, so, which is great. But what am I gonna do with those cracks now? I don't have that many left. I have a bit of spare, but nothing from the blue here. And those ones are humongous. Another thing. As for me, I don't have aphantasia. I'm pretty good in imagining stuff in detail, but with this table project, I only had a rough idea of how it could turn out. And let me tell you, that's not always a good thing. You see, every time I can't picture a project clearly in my head, it's usually because it's either super weird, like this one, or way out of my comfort zone. And those projects, well, I hate to say, they don't always turn out really great. So inspiration comes from so many different places. I believe ideas are like a muscle. The more you use them, the stronger they get. Nick from Pedillo Studio said it perfectly. You gotta keep thinking about your craft and stay involved. Following other creators, watch what they do and soak up everything you love about your field. Do this enough and suddenly ideas will start popping into your head like popcorn in a hot pan. Popcorn. As I worked on this project, I realized something cool. All these problems I was solving, they were sparking new ideas. That's how ideas often work. You start with one crazy thought, like building a table out of crayons. Maybe a little stupid, but then as you work on it, you run into problems. Solving those problems leads to new ideas. Before you know it, you have come up with 10 more crazy projects you want to do. Remember, every wild idea starts somewhere. Who knows, maybe your next great idea is hiding in your junk drawer right now, just waiting for you to be noticed. Speaking of wild ideas, mine was about to melt faster than a crayon left in the sun. Have you ever watched a project fall apart right before your eyes? Well, grab your safety goggles, because things are about to get messy. I'm terrified of this part now. It keeps cracking on me and lifting up. You can see that here. Here there's a huge lift here. There's a huge lift here and on the corner. And I don't know if that is the whole thing is gonna like just float away. So I'm gonna heat it up once more. Hope it melts everything down again and it stays there until the epoxy cures. Very, very unlikely, I think. But I don't know what to do right now because I'm running out of time and it's looking cool, but those cracks and that lifting, tough one, tough one, tough one. Our worst fears came true. The crayons started cracking like crazy, and it gets worse. Some of the melted parts even started floating. It was a huge mess. I tried to think of a way to fix it, but the only thing I came up with was to just go with it and live with the cracks. So we did another flat coat of epoxy, hoping it somehow would make it better. In fact, it made it way worse. Okay, so I just came in and let's look at our disaster. So let's see how it goes. It should be cured by now. Checked it a couple of days ago, it didn't look too bad. It's like, oh no. Oh no. Seems like the crayons shrank again and completely, oh my god, everywhere, little spots everywhere, oh my god, separated from the epoxy here everywhere. Oh no. This project is going so well. Oh my. After the second pour, something super weird happened that I didn't even think about. The two epoxy layers bonded together, which sounds good, right? Wrong. When epoxy cures, it shrinks, and it shrinks in all directions. This meant the top layer pulled the bottom layer off the wax. So now we had massive voids that looked like fungus growing under the epoxy. Not exactly the colorful masterpiece I had in mind. I really started to doubt that I could even fix this project. But in the moment, I thought to myself, let's let future Tom take care of that. I hate past Tom. So I started flattening the table with my really basic flattening jig. I hate this process, guys. It makes such a mess, especially with epoxy. I did a rough sand as well to assess the whole situation. Constantly thinking about how to solve this mess. The whole time I was breathing epoxy dust and crayon particles. And I know, crayons do look good, but they don't taste great at all. After all that work, I had to press pause on the tabletop and step away for a bit. Sometimes you need to take a break and let your brain reset. I needed to figure out what to do next. As I looked at my workshop now covered in a rainbow of wax shavings and epoxy dust, I couldn't help but laugh. This project was turning out to be a huge fail. But you know what? That's how it goes sometimes. When you try something completely mental. While I was still scratching my head about what to do with the crazy crayon top, I figured it was time to tackle the base. Now, I haven't really talked much about the legs of this table yet, so let me fill you in. My wife has a super cheap art table that I've been dying to throw out for ages, but she won't let me get rid of it for one reason. It tilts up so she can draw more comfortably. Problem is, it has zero storage and the top is as cheap as it gets. So, I had an idea. Why not repurpose that old table base and make it better? Here's the plan. We are gonna modify that old base to fit our new crayon top. But that's not all. We are also gonna build a little cabinet to store all of her art supplies. I kept the cabinet simple. Just stapled and glued the carcass together. Trust me, it's plenty strong. We are only putting 2 drawers in this cabinet. There's a normal sized one on the top and a super deep one on the bottom. The bottom one will also get a hidden compartment for the expensive art stuff. We do have a 4-year-old who loves to draw. For the drawer hardware, I used some soft close stuff from the big box store. Big mistake. Adjusting those ones was a pain, and I've already found a cheaper and hopefully better solution for the next time. The drawer fronts are made from some oak veneered plywood, which I had lying around. We painted everything in charcoal black to make it look nice. Oh, and did I mention? I'm terrible at painting. Seriously. If anyone knows of a sprayer that is easy to use and cheap and functional, let me know. Comments below, please. Let's go back one more time to inspiration and talk about where my inspiration usually comes from. For me, my biggest inspiration is my little family, especially for this project. Remember when I said that this art desk was for my wife? Well, there's more to that story. My wife is actually an amazing artist. She can create beautiful things that blow my mind. But since we moved and had our son, she hasn't been doing much art at all. It's not because she doesn't want to, it's just being a parent changes things. When you become a parent, you have to make sacrifices. That's true for everyone, but I think it's especially true for moms. They often lose themselves in being a mom. They give up so much for their kids. It's not a bad thing, but we need to appreciate it more. This project made me think about how we lose parts of ourselves as we grow up. We get jobs, have kids, and suddenly our hobbies and passions get pushed aside. That's why I think it's so important to have a space to be creative. Whether it's a whole room or just a corner of your garage, we all need somewhere to express ourselves. Somewhere to make a mess, try new things, and remember who we are beyond our daily roles. It's so easy to get lost in the day-to-day stuff of raising kids. Changing diapers, making meals, and doing laundry doesn't leave much time for creative thinking. That's why having a dedicated space for art or hobbies is so important. Building this table wasn't just about making furniture. It was about creating a space for my wife to rediscover her passion. A place where she can close the door, forget about being a mom for a while, and just be an artist. It's a reminder that it's okay to take time for yourself. It's okay to have a space that's just for you. To my wife, I hope this table will give you a space to forget the world for a while and just focus on yourself for a bit. Happy anniversary. Okay, so that didn't work. I think, and I can't think of anything else right now, like except like cutting into here and then and then opening it and pouring in a lot of epoxy, but I think at one stage you have to cut your losses. And what we're gonna do now is I'm gonna try and rescue it. I hate to admit it, but our crayon experiment failed. It looks horrible. I'm already a week late with this gift and I need to make a decision fast. So I came up with another crazy idea. Flood it with blue epoxy to make it look like water. At least that's what I'm trying to do. I started by taking off as much epoxy as I could. We don't have a lot of thickness left on the slab and I don't want to make it any thinner. I also don't want the epoxy on the whole table. I still want to be able to feel the wood. But before I did that, I posted a picture of it as is on Instagram and I asked you to do your worst, best ugly jokes for this table. Oh boy, you did well. Here are some of the best ones. This table is so ugly, the chairs refuse to sit with it at lunchtime. If a unicorn would do a dump, that's what it would look like. A unicorn rainbow vomit that landed in a craft beer? Jesus. This table is so ugly, I consider going to IKEA. Oh, that one stung. The internet is so mean. So we used the hand pen to remove as much material as we could. Flooded it with 3 different shades of epoxy to make it look like water-ish. We sanded it and it looks like shit. Sorry kids. Okay guys, so this is the construction that we are replacing and I want to repurpose this base. The biggest thing is that I didn't have the table until now. I designed it so that the cabinet exactly fits underneath here. So I hope that the cabinet fits underneath here perfectly. It's actually on the other side. Anyway, I took this off already. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna fit it next to the cabinet and then we're gonna fit the tabletop on top. And because this table has to lift like this and the part that's sticking over to the cabinet can't lift, we have to do a super scary cut with the track saw on our tabletop. At this point, I was running out of time and ideas, so I made a tough choice. I decided not to fix it anymore. I'm just gonna give it as is and replace the tabletop later. I know, it's not ideal, but sometimes you just gotta know when to quit. This whole project has been a roller coaster. I started with this big idea of making something unique and special. I imagined my wife's face lighting up when she saw that amazing crayon table. Instead, I'm giving her something that looks like a kindergarten art project gone wrong. But you know what? I learned a lot from this mess. First, not every crazy idea turns out great. Sometimes they just turn out crazy. Second, it's okay to admit when something isn't working. At least that's what I tell myself. I could have kept trying to fix this table forever, but sometimes you gotta just cut your losses. I also learned that epoxy and crayons don't mix well. Who knew, right? The funny thing is, this whole project started because I wanted to do something thoughtful for my wife. I wanted to give her a space to be creative. And in a weird way, I still kind of think I did that, just not in the way I planned. This table might not be the best work I've ever done, but it's got a story behind it. In the end, I think this is one of those gifts where the thought really does count more than the actual gift. It's not perfect, it's not even good, but it's a reminder of how much I care. And sometimes that's enough. This was probably my biggest woodworking fail yet. But you know what? I had fun trying new things, kind of, and my wife loved it anyway. She's happy to have her own space to be creative. As for Red, our brave crayon hero, he's gonna get a new job. My son will probably use him to draw a big red T-Rex. Not a better retirement for a crayon. What do you think? Well, again, sometimes our craziest ideas don't work out, but that's okay. We learn from our mistakes, keep trying new things. That's how we grow and get better at what we do. Now check out this video next, where I actually rescue a project that was destined to fail. And as always, I appreciate you and I'll see you next time.